Hello. We are back with Zelda Breath of the Wild Minimum Weapons Run. Now, something that has been cropping up a lot in my, also I'll call it research, my look into the fan theories of Zelda Breath of the Wild is that Zelda Breath of the Wild has a timeline placement, and we're not exactly sure where it is. And honestly, we hear this type of argument crop up time and time again. Basically, everything time a new Zelda game comes in, it is immediately met with, well, where does it fit? And while I was originally one of the people who sat and tried for months on end to create a timeline placement for every game out there, it's kind of, it's difficult. You could claim that Breath of the Wild takes place earlier in the timeline. You could say it takes place later in the timeline. You can say it takes place as a convergence event after Hyrule Warriors. But I think we can all agree that continuity is not something that Nintendo was really focused on with Breath of the Wild. Rather, it is, unfortunately, more of a reboot, a soft reset, a way to approach the game in a totally new way so that they're not confined to the statements of, well, where does it fit? And try to have instances and lore associated with where it could potentially fit in with other games. Now, because of this, Zelda Breath of the Wild kind of has a few major flaws or open-ended narratives that are up to the interpretation of each individual. Whatever the individual wants to focus on, that's the information they're going to take away from it. So myself, being an individual who played Twilight Princess, Majora's Mask, for days on end, immediately recognized the Mirror of Twilight on the southeastern corner of the map. And I thought, oh, well, this is cool. I know this artifact. Why is it here? It should be in the Arbiter's grounds in the desert region. Cool. But other people who may have focused more on Wind Waker or the DS games could note that the rock salt item was a remnant of an ancient sea. Regardless of which area you looked in, there is pieces of information that tie each game together in some capacity or another. Which brings a new theory to light. One that I personally disagree with, in that it was the belief that the world of Zelda is actually the world of Breath of the Wild was actually a before Skyward Sword, and that there was a timeline split at the end of this game, or at the end of Tears of the Kingdom. I disagree with this particular statement. The locations of various games showing up, like the Arbiter's Grounds, the Shrines of Power, Wisdom, and Courage showing up from Skyward Sword, the Rito or the Lynels, even Spectacle Rock, all showing up in some capacity or another, has has bearing on what or where this game takes place overall, but it also is more of an homage, how do I want to put it? A celebration of Zelda. Anybody who understands or knows the world as a whole will be able to pick out pieces of the world and say, hey, this is where I want to be. This is what I want to see. And I think that is part of the beauty of Breath of the Wild's world design, is that there's no right or wrong answer for many of these solutions. It is always do what makes you feel, what works best for you. Now, at this moment in time, we are finishing up the Ridgeland region. The Ridgeland region of Breath of the Wild is kind of a little bit dubious and a little bit harder than I think what I was intended, the original intended route for me to take was. And I'll acknowledge that. But ultimately, I have to do what I have to do in order to actually get from point A to point B. And I do have plans to try and finish the game in a way that feels right to me. Now, one of the things that you're going to notice is I despise fast travel. I love the world as a whole, and even games like The Witcher 3, I tended not to use fast travel as much as possible, simply because you're taking out actual world and breathing in this space in exchange for a loading screen. And I've never liked it. But be that as it may, I believe, personally, that Breath of the Wild is a soft reboot. It has pieces of the world from previous areas of the franchise that all tie into the end results. I think that's a fair statement to make. But it's not so in your face about it that you can't just play the game and enjoy it. This could be a world in which the Great Sea of Wind Waker has dried up. This could be the world after Ganon is sealed away in Ocarina of Time. This could be a reimagining of the original Zelda. This could be a world after Twilight Princess, where we get to see just how expansive the world has become. Or this could be something totally new in its entirety. Something that we hadn't yet had the chance to look at and say, this is what it is. Now you'll have to excuse me here. Breath of the Wild's, what I'm attempting to do here is that this particular shrine requires, or not necessarily requires, but leans into the bow as a tool. As a result of it leaning fairly hard into the bow as a tool as well as stasis, it's rather difficult to take down this particular shrine without ending up either hurting yourself or, in my case, absolutely obliterating every piece of wood that I have. My goal at this moment in time is to create an updraft. Creating an updraft will effectively allow me to, how do I want to put it? If I can get an updraft going, then I can theoretically move the giant ball by simply letting it land on my head. Or something. It doesn't necessarily have to be about besting one area or another. It's all about how to actually get the world to follow the plan that I have sorted. Good news about this is it can't be that bad, right? The bad news is I have absolutely no idea if I actually can create an updraft inside a shrine. Because, truth be told, that doesn't look very promising. If I can create an updraft, then I can get anywhere in the shrines using fire, effectively. If I can't, then I'm kinda hooplawed as far as certain shrines go. This isn't the end of the world. It isn't like it's going to obliterate everything that I have worked towards. but rather it's a circumstance that might be just a tad beyond my control. Theoretically, a bomb jump could work and do the job that I have envisioned for it rather easily. But I don't think that's going to be the case. Anywho, given that this shrine is pretty well toast and isn't actually going to get me anywhere, I'm going to head south towards, what is it called? Wash's Bluff? The goal is to stand under a blood moon in my underwear. That sounds ridiculous out of context. If you know what the... I've never seen that Lionel before. Cool. Well, I guess we're just gonna make a little bit of a roundabout here. No, put the bow away. I am not interested in fighting you. Bye-bye. Thank you. Anyways, on the way to Wash's Bluff, a couple notable things about this region are that most of this region focuses rather heavily into the bow as a tool. The expectation being that the player is going to be able to use the bow to knock stuff around or fire an arrow through X number of holes or. Problem with that is, with there being a bow in the final battle against Ganon, we're talking the full-on Beast Ganon from the final fight, it is effectively, if I am doing a minimum bow run, I want to avoid using one prior to said battle. And so I'm trying my darndest to avoid using it because every single shrine outside of the 4 from the Great Plateau is optional. This is just all gravy. And part of it is because I want to actually see how far I can push the game without actually getting myself in any major concern. How did I survive that swarm of geese without getting hurt? Anyway. The whole idea of going for every single shrine is the idea of preparing prior to the battle. Now, there are some, I suppose, side quests that are perhaps a little bit out there as far as their expectations go. I don't think that it's the most necessary to go running around all of Hyrule looking for 900 Koroks. But theoretically, if you need all of that inventory space to beat Ganon with a mop, then there's nothing really stopping you. And I think that is something beautiful about Zelda Breath of the Wild, is that your options are yours and yours alone. Anywho, it is now 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. In-game, the moon did rise, but it's white, not red, so it is not a blood moon night. So we're going to have to wait a little while before actually getting this particular shrine, much to my dismay, because I really want to get that particular shrine, simply because that's one that is all about timing. And I personally like the idea of the Blood Moon system. A lot of games don't really have a reset button. So you end up with a situation where Blood Moons are the hard reset, are the world's basis for why the world functions the way it does. But Breath of the Wild doesn't really... Breath of the Wild put a reason behind it into the game itself. A lot of open world games just say, yep, the monster's back. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. ultimately, I prefer the Blood Moon system because it gives a hard reason for why everything works the way it does. We're just gonna boom. All right, the Skelly guys are left behind, and yeah. Anyway, so with the Ridgeland region being as, I suppose, underwhelming or undercooked as it was, that's not the right word. It's a tougher region as far as enemy placement goes, but there aren't as many secrets hidden throughout this region as others. And sometimes that's to great benefit, sometimes that is to great disappointment. It really depends on the player's perspective. And so, each and every time I play this game, I usually end up going in a different direction. Sometimes I go south, sometimes I go north. There was one time I decided to do everything as a 3-heart run, and there's been one time where I said I wasn't touching any main quest until I had completed every known shrine in the game. I think that's something that we miss a little bit about open world games and their design philosophy, is that they have to be built with the mentality of your player is going to be approaching every region from any direction. And Breath of the Wild actually approaches this in both a weird way and a really decent way. Because of the nature of open worlds having this can approach from any direction mentality, they also have the issue of every single area is flat or has very little in terms of the ability to get from one region to the next. And so, with Breath of the Wild having a very mountainous region by comparison to other games of the same nature, I think it shows a lot of developer growth compared to other games out there. Because a lot of games have one, maybe two mountains just to show, hey, we have them and this is fine. But a lot of them don't really have much of any significant verticality to it. Breath of the Wild said, let's just let them climb. We can make the world however we want then, and they'll just be able to climb or clamber their way over any obstacle, and we'll get a 2-for-1. The players get a more lived-in, more grounded world. And we get our hands free to actually design the world the way we want to design it. Again, this is just one of the little tidbits about Breath of the Wild's world that is freeing. I think, generally speaking, Zelda has always been a very open-minded franchise. I talked about ingenuity, innovation, about trying to change up the formula or be something better or at least different from what came before. And this has always stuck with me. When you look at certain franchises like, I'm gonna poke at one of my favorites here, Metroid. Metroid has a very samey world. And while each game tries to improve upon the last in terms of speed, in terms of gameplay, you're looking at effectively the same type of world one game to the next. So much so that if you don't know the ins and outs of the design of Samus's suit, you might not even know which game you're playing. And that is kind of shocking for a lot of them. note that Metroid Dread is a little bit of an outlier here, being the highest graphical fidelity of all of the franchise up to this point. But Zelda, generally speaking, you can tell which game you're playing by the features involved that make it unique. Even among the top-down games, each of them has each of them has often a very different art style. Each of them has a very different feel, very different items, very different approach to the game design. Whereas most Metroids, after Super, up until, we'll say, the DS era, felt much the same one game to the next. This is not a bad thing. Those games are great games. They are well polished, beautiful, and well thought out worlds. But comparing them to Zelda, admittedly, is like comparing apples to oranges. You're gonna get a couple bruises on one or the other, but they're going to both be a product that is phenomenal at the end. So, why do I bring this up, I suppose? Outside of the Oracle games and Link's Awakening, almost every single Zelda came out on a different platform, with the bulk of them that have the same platform having vastly different design philosophies. Zelda 1 and 2 were both the NES, and they both had a different approach to how the game could be built. One being a top-down, one being side-scroll. You had Link's Awakening and the Oracle games, which all are the same platform, and unfortunately had some issues with their gimmicks, but each of them stand out enough with how their gimmick functions to make the game unique even after everything else has been said and done. Fantastic. If you look over at the DS games, you have Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks, as well as a remake of the Four Swords. Again, you have an open sea, a very linear train scenario, and you have 4 players playing together through online multiplayer. These 3 do look nothing alike, or very little alike at the very least. You have Minish Cap, which functions on its own system even. You have Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, which had vastly different design philosophies as far as how the game functioned. You have Wind Waker and Twilight Princess with vastly different world design. You have Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword with vastly different world design. You can tell which game you're playing by the environment in which you're playing. And so, I have to give credit to the developers of Zelda for always trying to shake it up. Anywho, I'm gonna say that shrine is probably not happening either. Glorious. Well, since we're up here, let's see if we can find Satori, I guess. And, next time, I think we are going to destroy as much of the Ridgeland area as possible to kickstart a Blood Moon, and then make our way off to the Dueling Peaks region of Hyrule. And hopefully get a couple more items, because I'll be honest, 4 hearts with next to no armor is really starting to get difficult. Or rather, is more difficult than it needs to be. That's the right way of putting it. Anywho, if you like what you see, drop a like, leave us a sub, and we'll catch you next time. Until then, hope you all have a good one.